Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
Welcome to this episode of the Superhumanize Podcast, where we explore the frontiers of science and spirituality, looking into the profound connections that shape our understanding of reality. Today, I am thrilled to introduce a guest who has been at the forefront of this intersection for decades, Lynne McTaggart. Lynne McTaggart is not just an author. She's a pioneer whose groundbreaking work has challenged and expanded our understanding of the mind, intention, and the very fabric of the universe. Her international bestsellers, including The Field, The Intention Experiment, and The Power of Eight, have redefined how we perceive the role of consciousness in shaping our reality. Her work is rooted in science, drawing from quantum physics, noetic science, and epigenetics, while also resonating with ancient spiritual wisdom. For instance, Lynne's exploration of the zero-point field is reminiscent of the concept of Brahman in the Upanishads, where all existence is interconnected in a vast web of energy and consciousness. Lynne's research has demonstrated the measurable impact of intention through scientific experiments, and also echoes the timeless wisdom found in texts like the Tao Te Ching and the Bhagavad Gita, where the power of focused thought and collective consciousness is revered as a path to transformation. In today's conversation, we're going to focus on her research and how the latest discoveries in quantum mechanics, such as non-locality and retrocausality, are not just theoretical, but have practical implications for our daily lives. Lynne McTaggart has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and her insights have inspired millions around the world, including the likes of Dan Brown, who referenced her work in his bestseller, The Lost Symbol. Today, we'll be exploring not just the surface of her work, but diving into the intricate details that make her one of the most fascinating thinkers of our time. Lynne, I am so pleased, so happy, and so excited to have you on the show. Welcome to the Superhumanize Podcast.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, Ariana.
I have been following your work, and your work has influenced my life for many years. And your work has profoundly bridged the gap between science and spirituality. You started talking about this way before it became more mainstreamly, and particularly through your exploration of the zero-point field, which is a concept that suggests a universal energy field interconnecting all matter. And this is also a concept that's talked about in quantum field theory or in spiritual texts, the Upanishads, and similar to the Brahman, right? This ultimate reality that underlies all phenomena. And I would love to know from you, since you have been immersed in this for quite a bit, how have you seen the scientific understanding of the zero-point field evolve? And what implications have come through for our comprehension of consciousness and our potential to influence reality?
What a great question. So I should say I published The Field over here in the UK in 2001, in the US 2002. So it's going in 2026, it will be 25 years. I think there has been much more of an acknowledgement that there are not two sciences. When I wrote the book, there was very much the divide between the science of the tiny and the science of the large, sticks and stones world. And by that, the tiny, every quantum physicist understood, operated according to one set of really weird rules. They were things like non-locality, also called entanglement, whereby once one quantum particle bumped into or in some way interacted with another quantum particle, you could move one to Venus and the other one to Los Angeles, and they would still know about and be influenced by each other through all space and time. Now, what they meant and essentially tried to argue was that once these subatomic particles, which did that, which weren't in actual anything, until observed by a scientist or measured. And with that implication, the world is just a batch of unset jello out there. And it doesn't become something set and real until observed or interacted with by consciousness. All of those strange properties of the quantum world were then supposed to disappear once subatomic particles realized they were part of a collective whole. They were part of something bigger that could be part of the big visible world. And that bizarre concept that there were two rules for the world, one for the tiny, one for the large, was something that I questioned way back then. And certainly there's become more evidence creeping along. Science creeps along in its new story. There's been evidence that subatomic particles operate according to the weird world of quantum physics, but so do many things at large. We know now that photosynthesis, one of the most important processes on Earth, whereby a plant takes the light of the sun and in its crucible, it turns that light into oxygen. So it's responsible for all life on Earth. That operates according to a process that is quantum, where it is a sense that electrons operate in a case of superposition inside a plant. So we know that. We know other aspects of life are being demonstrated. Even the largest molecules on Earth are demonstrating quantum effects. So we're starting to get that there's actually one big science of life and not two sciences. So quantum physics, essentially, as I wrote many years ago, ripped up the rule book and scattered it to the four winds and suddenly said, no, there's a new science here. And there's many other aspects to that science that demonstrate that consciousness cannot be separated from it. We are not static entities that observe a world that's there when we're not there. We are part of it. We are co-creators, as many people say. We are participating in the creation of this world. We are altering it at every moment with our consciousness. Things have moved along, but the scientific story, as they say, moves ahead one funeral at a time. And we're still operating in the main, according to that old scientific story. And scientists believe and espouse the idea, this is mainstream scientists, that we know most of how the world works. The point is, we know nothing about how the world works according to those old rules, because science, you have to understand, is just a story. And new chapters get written periodically that rewrite what has happened before. And what I discovered all those years ago was that we were on the brink of a completely new understanding of the world, a new understanding of consciousness as central to the world. And that's really been the work I've been doing ever since. Working to see how far we can take it with consciousness, how far intention works. Can we heal the world with our thoughts? Can we make plants grow faster with our thoughts? Can we lower violence with our thoughts? And more recently, I say recently, since 2008, do small groups heal each other, themselves, and the world? I think it is moving ahead slowly with a new scientific story, to answer your question. But the authors of that are people outside of the mainstream in the main.
Thank you for your perspective, Lynn. And talking about story, I've always believed that stories are the fuel of humanity. And how powerful would it be if everybody could embrace and integrate that our story is one of power and one of co-creators and not one of victims and mere bystanders to things happening to them and to the world. I've always loved this one scene in the movie The Matrix where Neo stands on top of a skyscraper with Morpheus, and Morpheus basically just telling him to jump or to fly. And as he believes he can't, when he believes he can. And I think we're really at the brink of something fascinating, a, a crossroads in human history, if you so will. For many people that may not be so deep in the subject, how could they start to train their minds to more effectively access and maybe also utilize the 0 point field for personal and also collective transformation? What are some good ways to move into this?
That's been the cornerstone of my work since I did my book, The Field. I
Mhm.
had a lot of leftover business. And one of those was a great deal of evidence being carried out in laboratories around the world, demonstrating that thoughts are things that affect other things. So the journalist in me, I'm a journalist by background, an investigative reporter of all things, wanted to know how far we could take this. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about a tiny, subtle effect, or are we talking about curing cancer with our thoughts? And also, I was very curious about what happens when lots of people are thinking the same thought at the same time. Does it magnify the effect? So, with my next book, I collected all of the evidence about the science of intention, but it was also an invitation to take part in a global laboratory study because I realized by that time the field was in 30 languages at that point. And so I realized I've got a lot of readers out there. And I also, by that time, knew a lot of scientists doing work in consciousness research. So I thought if I put them together, I'd have the largest research situation into collective intention in the world, the largest global laboratory. So that's what I did back in 2007. I kicked off the intention experiment. Now, to date, we've run 41 experiments, everything from making seeds grow faster to purifying water to lowering violence in war-torn areas to healing someone of post-traumatic stress disorder. And war-torn or violent areas, we focused on St. Louis, Missouri, the officially most violent place in America. We lowered violence there, it would seem. We focused just on one neighborhood. We had loads of evidence from the police going back 3 years before our experiment and 6 months afterward. We compared St. Louis as a whole, the neighborhoods around Fairground, the area with the neighborhood we focused on, officially the most violent streets in America, and all of the neighborhoods around it, property crime versus violent crime. And I had a professor of statistics analyze it. And we found that just in the focus area we chose, violence went down by 43%, whereas it rose everywhere else in St. Louis, Missouri, including the city as a whole. And even property crime in St. Louis continued to go up as it had done before. But violent crime, the focus of our intention, went down by 43%. So
Mm.
of those 41 doing all of these things, 37 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. And I've worked with a load of different scientists from Princeton, University of Arizona, University of California, Freiburg University, even St. Petersburg Technical University. Now, someone in Russia who is a well-known physicist. So I've used different scientists so I couldn't be accused of bias. And we've demonstrated that effect. But then I've moved into small group intention. And this is where it answers your question. In 2008, I asked the question, okay, it's starting to work, these intention experiments. What if I scale down the whole thing? And I put people into small groups and have them do intention for someone in the group with a health challenge. I thought it was going to be a very mild effect, like a feel-good effect, like getting your back rubbed or having a facial. And so I did this in one workshop I was running in Chicago and had people go into groups, had them focus on somebody with a health challenge. And then in the next day's session, I asked all the people who had got intention to come up and talk about what happened to them, handed them a mic. Again, thought it was going to be like getting their back rubbed. That's not what happened. They said things like this: I have depression and it feels lifted today. I have terrible IBS and my gut's normal today. I have terrible arthritis in one knee, and I remember this woman limping all weekend, and I'm walking normally today. And the most incredible of all, I have cataracts and they're 80% better. So I was a bit freaked out by all of this. I thought, wait a minute, it's supposed to be a little mild feel good effect to it. I'm not a healer. And so I started experimenting with it. Every time I ran a workshop, every time I gave a talk, I put people into groups, watched what happened. And I discovered all sorts of things were getting healed. I've had to date 3 people get up out of wheelchairs, somebody else, a few other people throwing away their crutches after one intention experiment. And then I started thinking, what if I put people into groups for a year and taught them all the things that I know now about how to do intention? And I mixed together the science of intention and the things that work best in the laboratory with practices that were common in most areas of ancient wisdom. They have different techniques, but they also have a lot of commonalities. I tried to distill all of that to a simple program. And I found once I started putting people into groups, teaching them and following them for an entire year, the people who met religiously week after week would almost certainly have some sort of major transformation in their life, whether it was being healed from an illness, whether it was receiving money if they were in debt, just the money they needed, whether it was having a new career, fixing a relationship that was estranged, even something that was many years old, even something involving someone who had passed, having a new relationship, or even creating a new life purpose. People were healing all kinds of parts of their lives. And the people who meet, as I say to this day, that was in 2015, I did the first year-long course. To this day, and I run it once a year, it's called the Power of 8 Intention Masterclass. To this day, the people who meet religiously week after week are the people who see their lives changed. So what people can do, first of all, if they join my community, lynnmctaggart.com, doesn't cost anything to join, you receive some free downloads from me that help you know some of the very rudimentaries of intention and also the rudimentaries of how to set up a Power of 8 group. So that you receive. And then there's all sorts of tools on my website for all sorts of persons, whatever somebody can afford. We have free things, free tools. We have courses of all variety, everything from foundation courses like Intention Essentials to my year-long masterclass, which kicks off February every year, to retreats where we use retro intention to heal your past. There are all kinds of ways people can get started with this. But the point is, once you do, once you work at it, and if you work it, it works. Once you work it, it works. And once you begin to start realizing the power of intention in your life, you start, as one of my students put it, you're the driver and you're in the driver's seat of your own life.
Yes, exactly this, Lynn. I'm not a religious person. I consider myself spiritual, but in many of the sacred scriptures and texts, you find it's been said before. I believe it was in Matthew that for where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I am with them. Like the focusing of intention, of prayer, or if you look at women gathering in circles, or thousands of years, which is now also experiencing a revival. It changes lives, and especially with the kinds of tools and the knowledge that you offer. And there's more and more empirical evidence coming up, such as you have provided Dr. Dean Radin, who I believe you also know at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. He's also been a guest on the podcast. And what really would interest me, also aside from the individual, is if we look at larger organizations and institutions, there's a lot of them out there also that want to do a lot of good. And obviously, it starts within themselves. How could they apply these principles of group intention to actually foster a culture of collaboration and positive change, especially in these times that we're living in now, where it seems so divisive everywhere we look?
Okay. I try to work with that too. I have a thing called the Intention Challenge that I do every month. And what I've been working on recently is asking people to do an intention and to really focus on somebody who has very different beliefs than you,
Mhm.
and just bringing people together. And I know it works with group intention because I've seen it several times. Most recently, an intention I did, this is prior to the Israel-Gaza war. I was very lucky to be able to use a platform that enabled me to put cameras in multiple places, and working with two people who had good connections in both Israel and the Arab Gulf states. We put cameras in 8 conference rooms in 8 Arab cities, and the 9th camera was in an auditorium full of Israeli Jews. Now, I had to broker this whole event because the Arabs were not talking to the Israelis, or were not talking to the Arabs. Even the two leaders were very awkward coming together to talk to each other about setting this whole thing up. But we did it. And after we did intention to lower violence in Jerusalem, there was this extraordinary love fest. In this platform, I was able to speak to them. They were able to speak to me by individual conference rooms and then speak to the entire group. And they were saying things like this. The Arabs from Tunisia saying, "Your God is my God," to the Jews saying, "We love you, brother and sisters." And everybody's crying, everybody's sending love. And what I have found is there's something extraordinary about a collective focus on something altruistic. Now, you mentioned Jesus, when two or more are gathered. There's also, I studied the Acts, because I read about a mistranslation in there. Now, the Acts are the part of the Bible where Jesus is supposedly ascended, and his followers, the apostles, are supposed to spread the word and start the church. So what he said was, in the King James Version, it says that he advised them to pray with one accord, which is a very anemic phrase. What he actually said, according to the Hellenic Greek, was to pray homothumadon. And what that means in Greek is passionately and with one voice. So what he's talking about here is, think of a Beethoven symphony where it all blasts together to this collective sound. That's what he was talking about. And what he said was, you will heal and you will be healed. Now, what's been fascinating to me in watching tens of thousands of people do Power of 8 groups is the feedback I get a lot, where people feel there are some kind of light beings there. They talk about that. They talk about extra energy. They talk about amazing tingling in their hands. They talk about an altered state of consciousness. And we have done brainwave studies on Power of 8 groups. I worked with a team of neuroscientists at Life University, one of the largest and most prestigious chiropractic universities in the world. And what we discovered was the brainwave signatures, which we expected to look exactly like those of meditation, looked nothing like those of meditation. What they looked like and were almost identical to were the brainwave signatures studied by Dr. Andrew Newberg, then of the University of Pennsylvania, a neuroscientist who was studying Sufi masters during chanting and Buddhist monks during ecstatic prayer. So what we recognized with Power of Eight groups, and by the way, the people we studied were student volunteers who had never done this before. Most of them have never even meditated before. What we discovered is that people in a Power of Eight group enter into a state of ecstatic oneness. And I think that oneness, that real sense of unity, which we don't get to experience, is the entry point for healing. Now, the reason this happens is very simple to understand. Parts of the brain, like the parietal lobes, they sit back here. They help us navigate through space. They tell us, this is me, this is not me. They were dialed way down. So are the temporal lobes, who do that also. And the right frontal lobe, part of the brain involved in worry, doubt, negativity, all dialed way down. So again, these were people in a state of ecstatic oneness. And as I say, we are all part of the field, no question. But we don't experience life like that. We experience life in total separation. We experience life as lonely people on a lonely planet in a lonely universe. We experience life by ourselves. During a Power of Eight group, we don't. We experience life as a unity. And then things start feeling very different. Things start opening up in you, in your soul. And one of the key pieces here, Ariana, is altruism. That's probably what's a bit different about my work, because what you hear in the personal development field, of course, is self-help. That's the whole cornerstone of it. Me, fixing me. And what my work is all about is fix others, and then you fix you. And so one of the beauties of a Power of Eight group is you have to do intentions for 7 other people as well. And that getting off of yourself is a real route to healing, a total route to healing.
That reminds me of something. This is so beautiful. What you just mentioned, of the Sufism, which they had this concept, I believe, of heart-centered awareness, or the heart is the seat of divine consciousness. What you just shared, this focusing the intention on others. I recently had the opportunity to speak with a First Nations leaders at a gathering called Aniwa, where they brought together 55 indigenous elders from all across the world. And there were also leaders who spoke about the healing of their traditional medicine, which is peyote, a medicine that can also induce strong visions, and how traditionally you do not take this medicine and focus on yourself, but you gather in a group, and one person that's agreed upon beforehand who has some issue. It can be health, it can be emotional, whatever. And then the group takes the medicine and they focus on this individual. So it's about focusing and supporting the other. It's not me. And something which actually it brings up an interesting question I wanted to ask you, and that is regarding, if you have an opinion, just talking. This, of course, is an ancient tradition for different native groups, communities, but now we're observing a resurgence of psychedelic use and a general acceptance also from the mainstream population. Do you think that these compounds or these different medicines, when taken with reverence and respectfully, that they can actually also help open up our awareness to connect into the field and to basically also rocket fuel our intentions?
Great question. To a child who grew up in the 60s. I missed the big part of the 60s revolution, but I was at the tail end of it. There's no question that psychedelics like LSD and all of those traditional medicines, magic mushrooms, etc., open up the doors of perception. They definitely do open up gates. However, it really depends on the individual, and it needs to be taken with care and with an experienced person. Because I know of a friend who shot himself and killed himself as a result of drugs. My husband knows several people who died. People have good trips and they have bad trips. So it really depends on the individual, where they're at, and also the person who is guiding them. Now, do you need to have psychedelics to experience God or experience this all that is? In my experience, no. You just need a power of 8 group. You need a group and a common intention. And it's a gateway to the miraculous. I think there are levels of perception, and it depends very much on the individual.
Yes, and absolutely agreed, Lynn. I think when somebody chooses to engage and to communicate, because it is a communication with self, larger self, and also these, as they often get talked about by people who've experienced them, intelligences. For example, in the case of ayahuasca, as a
Mhm.
intelligence much larger, much more ancient than human intelligence that work through you and with you. It needs to be done in a way that's responsible, that's reverent. It's not about getting high. And you need to be with people who know how to take care of you, because these bad trips, oftentimes it is deeply buried trauma that comes up and light gets shown upon it. And maybe there's also some healing, but there will still need to be some integration. And oftentimes people go into these experiences and things get blown open that they then do not know how to handle or how to integrate into their daily lives with. And I love also, what you said. Yes, the power of 8. You have a group of 8 people. You do not need this. It's a tool. And I think different tool for different people, like psychedelics can be a tool. It's not for everyone. And I think a key aspect of what you're also describing is this: you're getting back into the driver's seat and you are reconnecting. You are actually experiencing what is our birthright, this incredible feeling and beingness of being one, literally. And which brings us to also a worldview to not just think about it, but experience it. A world philosophy beingness of over competition. This worldview of competition, us versus them, and resources are limited. That's what we've basically gotten stuffed down our throats for the last few thousand years. And you also emphasize this altruism that you spoke about. You emphasize cooperation over competition. There's plenty of people also who support this. Biologist Lynne McTaggart, she has this theory of symbiogenesis, and which points to the corporation as the driving force in evolution. There's countless others. And it's reflected in indigenous philosophies. If you look at some African traditions, Ubuntu, I am because we are, right?
Yep.
I really think we have such an opportunity now with this reemergence of awareness to apply these principles of cooperation and interconnectedness. And I'm curious to hear from you, Lynn. What are your hopes? What are your dreams of how we can use this to address global challenges?
First of all, just to comment on this whole idea of competition versus cooperation. Back in 2011, I published a book called The Bond,
Mhm.
where I was trying to answer, was Darwin right? Were we meant to be this competitive? And overwhelmingly, the science demonstrated no, that human beings need to belong, they need to connect, they need to give, they need to be fair. It's built into their DNA. But we are cooperative individuals, and we thrive when we do cooperate. So I was very clear then that we needed to essentially change everything. We need to create new methods of working and business where we reward the good, not just the profitable, and where we understand that it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. That kind of competition exists even in our personal development field. And then there's really no place for it. There's plenty of room for everybody. So my hopes in my own work And as I said, looking into the science of altruism, which I did when I published my book, The Power of Eight, I put in there, I was trying to figure out why these Power of Eight groups are healing people. It was starting to frighten me, really. I needed to understand it. I discovered that one big piece is altruism. When you study the science of it, altruism is truly a bulletproof vest. People who do things for other people live longer, healthier, happier lives. It's clear. And one of the pieces of science that nailed it for me was the study of two groups of people. One group were what they called the pleasure seekers, who had lots of money, had all the vacations in the world, and everything they wanted, etc. And they figured when they looked at them, their immune system markers, they would find really happy people who had great immune systems. That's not what they found. They found that these people had terrible immune system markers. They were perfect candidates for heart attacks, Alzheimer's, diabetes, the whole coterie of degenerative diseases. These guys were going to drop like flies. Then they looked at another group who were just affluent, but were living a life of service. And they found these people had robust immune systems. These people were going to live forever. And that one really said it to me. It basically said that life of service, the life of giving, and I'm not talking about people who then completely ignore themselves, not people who are constantly doormats. I'm talking about people who have a life of service, who look at something other than themselves and enjoy a better life, can enjoy a longer, healthier, happier life. And so I want to bring this modality that can happen, as I've seen extraordinary things in Power of Eight groups. Aside from people getting up out of their wheelchairs, I just had somebody a few weeks ago who could barely walk on crutches, comes to a talk of mine. I put people in Power of Eight groups, as I always do at the end of my talk. That woman gets up at the end of her little 10-minute intention, that's all it was, throws away her both crutches and is walking normally. But I've seen even more miraculous things. I've had somebody who was deaf from radiotherapy regain her hearing. I had somebody else who was going blind from retinal damage, and no doctor could do anything for her. She now has 20/20 vision, thanks to her Power of Eight group. Somebody else with a genetic disease, a candidate for a liver transplant. One Power of Eight group, one 10-minute intention, completely reversed it. She has letters from doctors indicating that. And as I said, all they could do for her was scan her and say when it's going to be time for a liver transplant. She doesn't need it now. Her liver and her spleen are normal. And thousands of others. And people who I loved the story of Joy, who wanted to bring more love into her life. So her Power of Eight group focused on that. And this is during lockdown and COVID. She's in Australia. Out of nowhere, she gets a call. She was British born. She gets a call from a boyfriend of hers of 35 years ago. This is a woman in her 60s. And out of nowhere, and they start communicating, they start calling each other. Upshot is he goes to Australia, goes through lockdown, and they're now living together. So I've seen this. I've seen people get new, amazing jobs, make money just when they needed it, get windfalls just when they needed it, go through model divorces. Andy, she was going through a divorce, and after her group did an intention for her, the lawyers on both sides said to them, that was such a loving process. Could you give us the blueprint for it? So I've seen this over and over again. So I guess you asked me what my desire for the world is. I want the world to come together for intention experiments, because I see huge healing between entire populations with hated enemies afterward. I've seen that with Arabs and Americans after 9/11, we did an intention on the 10th anniversary, and I had Arabs and Americans take part. And again, it was a love fest after that. And I think that coming together for an altruistic purpose really changes people. We see this in lots of studies from Berkeley, for instance, University of California, Berkeley, that people, when they do something altruistic, even think about something altruistic, the heart leaps across the fence. They become more connected to people not like them. So that's my real wish right now in this incredibly polarized world. And we are doing lots of things for that. I'm running a giant worldwide intention experiment in January with Gaia, sponsoring it. We'll be broadcasting it in different languages. It'll be right after it's the Saturday after the inauguration of whoever wins the election in America. So we want to bring the heat down after that experience, because either way, there will be a lot of heat. And so that is one of the things that I want to do.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. And what you just said resonated so deeply. Acts, thoughts even, but acts even more so of altruism. I like doing these things because it makes me feel so good. So in the end, it may be even selfish, right? But it truly feels so good because I really believe it reconnects us to our deepest nature, to our true self. And I recently heard something really beautiful. I like to go when I'm in LA to a spiritual community founded by Reverend Michael Bernard Beckwith. And he said something that really stuck with me, where he said that the return of the Messiah is not, his words were better, but the essence of it, that the return of the Messiah was not an individual, it was community. And it was to link up with each other and with the good intentions. It's together and not a separate thing. It's not about me, it's about us. And so I am just so grateful for this beautiful conversation, Lynn, and for everything that you shared with us. I know there will be people listening to this who will have a deep desire to connect even further with you, to work with you. I know you have some really incredible offerings coming up. You have a retreat in the near future as well, right? Can you share with us how people can connect with you and maybe even do so in person, aside from the online offerings that you already shared?
Sure. So if you want to work with me in person, I run a retreat once a year at this amazing place called Broughton Hall, which was the runner-up for Downton Abbey location. It's a 16th century stately home and grounds, 3,000 acres, with also historic cottages dotted around. And the spiritually minded owners have created this beautiful place that has a spa, a beautiful meeting place, fabulous restaurant, but it's made with labyrinths and fire pits and all kinds of things that are really conducive to my work. And it's also the home now of the original equipment set up by Princeton University to test mind over matter, the pair research group. And the equipment's working. So since I've written about that in 2 of my books, I can actually bring people there and we can demonstrate it, and they can actually play with the equipment too. So what we do in the retreat, this is a Heal Your Past retreat. I use, and I've developed a system of retro intention, not to change what happens in traumas of your life. And they can be anything from being humiliated by a math teacher when you were 5 to parental abuse and everything in between. What I do is I work with people with retro intention. So the science demonstrates, and I've written about this, that time in the quantum world doesn't exist. It's one big smeared out now. And what we do is we don't change what happened in the past. We change your power around that. Because what happens with people when they're traumatized by something is it's a loss of power. They didn't say what they wanted to say. They didn't do what they really wanted to do. They were powerless. Most of the time, they were children. So we help people regain their power. I work with my husband, Brian Hubbard, who is the author of a Hay House published book called The Untrue Story of You. And it's all about a system he uses called time life, where he demonstrates that those elements of the past are an energy that sits on your shoulder like an unwanted guest. And it drives you, it creates your patterns, it creates your limitations. And so we work together to overcome them, to overcome patterns with intention and his work, to look at forgiveness and 360-degree understanding and lots of other things. And we have a lot of fun too. We eat a banquet dinner in the 16th century mansion with a string quartet. We have cosmic garden dinner. We have fire pit ceremonies. We have dancing. We have all kinds of things. So it's a really great week, and we've had wonderful hundreds of people just say it changed their life. So that's happening September 1st through 7th of this year. You can find out more about it by getting to lynnmctaggart.com. We only have 5 rooms left, but have a look if that is of interest for healing your past. If you want to do online things with me, I have a course called The New Science, which is an overview of all of the new science that I refer to in my books for people really interested in gaining an understanding in a very simple way. I have a course for professionals called Become a Better Healer, which is, I found when I had a health challenge a few years ago, I started taking notes because all the alternative people I went to were brilliant in their field, but their languaging, their thoughts and words were terrible. So I thought, maybe people need to have a course in this if they're professional healers, that their thoughts are affecting their patients. Their words are affecting their patients every bit as much as the medicine they offer or the techniques they use. So I do that for anybody, like a doctor to alternative practitioners. I have nurses, podiatrists, people in the health field, and acupuncturists and all of that, homeopaths, etc. So I'm running that also in early autumn, and of course in February, our great big masterclass. So you can find out about this and the intention experiments and all our free offerings on lynnmctaggart.com.
Outstanding, Lynn. Thank you so much. I'll make sure we'll put all of these beautiful gems of your offerings into the show notes. And I really would like to come in September, so I may just look at that. That just sounds fabulous, like a really wonderful immersion. I know it'll be outstanding.
Welcome you there if you can.
Thank you, Lynn. I am so grateful you made time for us today. Much gratitude for all the amazing things you have been doing for the past decades. And you truly have an impact on so many people around the world. It's hard to even put a number on it. And here I am one of them. So just profound gratitude to you, dear Lynn.
Thanks for listening, everyone.